Paul, what would you like to pitch?
I'm going to pitch Christian localism as a response to Christian nationalism. The fundamental issue is not the Christian part, it's the national part in how, and there's something about how media and how engagement has changed our interactions with the national since the 19th century. And the new media perhaps should refocus us on the relational, the local. So that's the core of the pitch.
All right, excellent. Ryan, it's going to be tough today, and I knew it would be. This group has not disappointed so far. Which pitch caught your attention?
I would say Paul's primarily, but man, I can relate to all the three, and I think the other three will certainly be able to fold it in somewhere along the way, perhaps. I will choose Paul's because I have actually come in thinking about it this morning. Localism and relationality is kind of like politics. And I know that's strange to say, but if we have this line between religion and politics, I think I am of the persuasion to mix it up a bit and say that politics can be and should be more local, and it can be and should be more relational, and it's more concrete. It's where the rubber meets the road and when it comes to practicing our faith. So in our religion and maybe in our worship and in our practices, and as various people from backgrounds and denominations, and even in I guess how we think about our faith, it can get kind of lost in, certainly it can get lost in politics, and it can get lost in the left brain, but often also gets lost in idealism of our own choosing. So as you say, Christian localism and relationality as a response to Christian nationalism, I think that fits very well with what I wanted to talk about today. And I like how you put that, in that I just think it's a controversial, perhaps, way to say it, that that politics is the thing. Relationality in politics should perhaps have more influence on our, I don't know, how we practice religion. So my summary that kind of brings these together is to say that I think, and this is what I've said to Brad several times as we have talked about our differences, I'm like, it's not that I just want to be political and it kind of makes me change my theology. It's that we, I think, lack a good political theology and a good theory for how church and state relate, or how religion and politics relate. David Brooks had a column on this where he talked about the very thing. I think there's a lack of it. Molly Worthen pointed to the fact that our spectrum is truncated when it comes to evaluating our range of options for how the two relate, as Americans specifically, as opposed to Europeans or Canadians. So that gets to the epoch thing. So it was a pretty clear choice for me. Thanks, Paul, and the rest of you for your pitches. I certainly have experience of wondering what to do on that truck ride home from the car wash.
Very local pitch that Jason had. Paul, what would you like to point to?
I'll point to Colin and movements. I think movements and institutions are a tension that we should break open and talk about. I'd love to respond to a lot of Brian stuff, but I'm going to pass it to Nathan.
All right. Thank you. Nathan, what would you like to point to?
Well, the only two I have notes on are Brian and Paul. So I missed Colin and Jason.
Well, Colin pitched the fact that movements beget institutions and then they perpetuate themselves. We want to save the manatees long after we're going to have to move them out of our swimming pools. And
like
Jason pointed out the fact that
women are a mystery. I caught that part.
Yeah, and we talked about women in our randos, so you have a
like Kansas weather.
Kansas weather.
Wow, that's a tough one. It's hard because I like Paul's about I feel like setting up things like localism versus nationalism is a participation choice or a participation navigation. I think I'm really interested in Collins about, like the living piece, sort of like grass growing, and then you make it a field and start to harvest it. that's and what you pointed out this morning about the Ross conversation with that's got that same thing. Like there's a liveliness to it that is in the providence of God, and then boy, I'd like to use that in some way or other for my ideas. So I'm going to go with the movement institutionalized. Colin, right. I think.
Very good. Colin, what would you like to point to?
I actually found Jason's quite fascinating.
Let's see. I believe you're the only single man here, so
yeah, I was thinking that.
I'm single.
Well, I find women quite fascinating, and like compared to them, men are like really simple mentally, like psychology, and they can be more complex than they would let on. It's just I've noticed like one of the maxims in counseling that I've noticed over the years is like women talk too much about their problems, and men don't talk enough about theirs.
All right. Okay, Colin. Jason, what would you like to point to?
I'm going to point to Paul. And do I need to elaborate on that, or?
Sure, please do.
So I think a lot of times when we think of that local versus national thing, it's coded liberal, the shop local movement and all of that. There's a word that I'm going to mangle, though, from conservatism. I think it's called subsidiarity, which is a subpoint of conservatism where it can have a little less egalitarian valence to it, that perhaps those who have much, who've been given much, need to give much to those in their community. But I think the idea of acting locally is something worth considering, and how that relates to the national scene.
All right. Well, I'm going to point to Paul as well. And there are certainly streams of many others, and Paul sort of won the vote. Colin's the second, and I think many of these issues will probably start to intertwine in them. I have been, for the last week and a half, been consuming 19th century history of the end of the Papal States and found it absolutely fascinating. And I think it is a lesson in what Paul is talking about, in that the people who are actually under direct papal jurisdiction and the rule of priests seem to really hate it. Priests made for lousy mayors and judges, and because priests were just doing everything, and the people under it were just ready to be done with it. But the 30,000 foot level questions about this is the vicar of Christ. Why wouldn't you want the vicar of Christ ruling over every aspect of your world? And the politics that happened in the 1948-49 revolt in Rome and the Papal States, and then the 1849, and then the 1870, because France hightailed it out of the Vatican, and Italy was mostly put together at that point, except Rome, and they were just wanting to finish the job. And the Pope is thrashing around looking for the Austrians or the French, or won't someone come to my defense? And the answer was no. And you have this massive turning of, and what you said, Brian, in terms of, part of what made 1848 such an explosive year was telegraph was just getting going in Europe. Railroads were just getting going in Europe. One of the things that the Pope previous to Pius IX was against was street lighting and railroads. He wouldn't permit it in the Papal State. Then Pius comes in early on in his regime. He's like, yeah, we'll do street lighting. Yeah, we'll do railroads. But very quickly, he began to recognize that railroads and street lighting and telegraph was building a momentum that sort of pushed us up into higher registers. And he first thought he could compete at that level, but then learned he couldn't. And then in the 1849 revolt, the propaganda that the Pope was putting out was foreigners and radicals have taken over Rome, when it was actually the Romans who had been basically sick of it. And his regime from 1850 to 1870 was basically propped up by foreigners. He needed foreigners. And then when the foreigners basically said, the French were getting their butt kicked by the Prussians, the Austrians had already lost to the Prussians, they're like, sorry, we can't afford your religion anymore. And then the Pope, until his concordat with Mussolini, he becomes the prisoner of the Vatican. And I mean, this history, which I knew nothing about, is just wild. And it has everything to do with this question of, and just my response also to Paul's, if anyone wants to know what local social media looks like, get on nextdoor.com. You think Twitter is a hot mess? Nextdoor.com. Oh, because it's one thing to throw bombs at your Twitter adversary. It's another thing to bitch about your neighbor. So
or your neighbor's kid that took your package, and they're basically calling for a public execution of a 12-year-old. Yeah.
So Paul, you win. Why don't you flesh out a little bit more and then we play?
So when I was in school, I went to elementary school partially in Europe, and the 1840s were a major, and it was in Austria, and it was a major part of what you learned about in like high school history class.
Really?
Yeah, that was a major. It was memorable. I remember it now, and it was all in German. And but I think there are things about the American story that we are, like, the Civil War is very defining in how we think about ourselves. In the 1840s, obviously the Napoleonic era, but then also the 1840s are a defining in how the European nation states observe themselves. And all these things are technological, as you alluded to. The European, the Catholic system of bishops was designed as a fractal distribution where you had someone to go to that you could actually get to help decide local religious issues and sort of manage this interface of politics and religion at the level of the city. And like the Holy Roman Empire was really just a bunch of city-states. And so as the technology changed, like today, Gospel Simplicity did something on the papal encyclical. And I haven't even read it yet, and I'm pretty darn Catholic. So I'm reading some Protestant's interpretation of a papal encyclical that I'll probably peruse at some point, but that's not how the fractal structure of the Catholic Church or really medieval society was set up. And so this nationalization, I guess, why am I talking about this? This nationalization sort of set up where we are today, but it was unidirectional to a large extent up until recently. And now it's bidirectional again. So pop psych or pop anthropology take here. I think our brains, largely our brains as men, are wired in such a way to engage in politics and want to solve things and want to get things done and to work together as a team in order to cooperate to solve problems. When we nationalize the conversation, we are then trying to solve like I talk about the Federal Reserve all the time at work, and I'm better positioned than 99% of the population, and still my opinion doesn't matter at all. And so I am in a situation where I want to go solve problems on like these are interesting problems. I think about them a lot, and it doesn't matter. And we have this innate desire to engage in politics, that is to work with each other, to argue out these ideas so we can come to a common solution. And we want to fight it out. And like Nathan is like probably a good example in the comment section there. He wants to fight out like we're going to have this conversation, we're going to battle out. And at some level, it doesn't matter. We don't matter at the national level. But our Christianity should matter at the local level. And we do have agency at the local level. And in building our church, I think we have the right instincts that we should be engaging with each other. We should be taking our Christian views into the public square, but the public square that we need to be taking it to is the school board or the neighborhood group, or even what is it? What's the neighbor site?
Nextdoor.com.
Nextdoor.com. Yeah. Take some charity to nextdoor.com and say something nice about your neighbor's garden. You know, I think there's a poison, which is the nationalization of this political instinct. And the solution is to not reject the instinct, but to bring it to the right fractal level so that it's effective.
All right. Go ahead, Jason.
Go, Jason.
You're muted, Jason.
There we go. A question or maybe a reflection, but are you saying basically that looking at things on the national stage is sort of like pornography, that it captures our instinct for something, but it's this, we use it then in this way that has no ability to actually be fruitful, and it's tempting to us, but it's not actual real. Is that kind of what you're saying? That it
pornography,
we get stuck into it, but we can't. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Well, there's the title for a video. I appreciate your idea, Paul, because I see this in church all the time, and I'm thinking, I'm really anxious to talk to Brian because I've talked to Brad, and lately Mark Parker's been sort of on a tear in the corner, and it often strikes me that all of those admonitions in the Bible are face to face. Take care of the widows and orphans. Take care of the homeless. Take care of the sick. Visit the prisoner. And we sort of jump that to prison reform, or and again, what's been brought out in our national politics for a long time is this often invisible but subtle transmission of taking care of my neighbor means if I vote for this particular party, then I expect the government to care for my neighbor so I don't have to. Or my neighbor needs a level of care that I can't provide, so that there's a transposition where my politics now, it's almost like instead of, unlike, let's say, a state church in previous centuries where my tax dollars go to the church to support the church. They still have that in Europe to a degree and in certain ways. I don't have to take care of the poor because I pay my tax dollars and the government is going to do that for me. But as a pastor, I would tell them, you're going to derive different spiritual fruit yourself if you actually come into community with that homeless person or that poor person. But I struggle with this. Let's say the case of Freddie. I can use Freddie because he's been on the channel plenty. And Freddie has lived by Social Security disability his entire adult life. And on some, that's kept him housed and fed, but it's also continued to disable him. And so one of the things that I've seen is that this sort of gets into Nathan's point about agency, that whoever is actually applying the agency, that's not neutral. And when I would work with Dominicans and I would talk about these work teams that came down, because work teams would come from Canada or the United States and they'd build a church or they'd build a parsonage, something like this. And the nationals would just think, well, these are very wealthy people up in North America and they have comfortable, secure, prosperous lives. And so what is it that they come down and help us? And in many ways, that I can think of a Spanish word, because I talk about the DR, I switched to Spanish, but it depreciates the gift that I knew that these Canadians and Americans, they were giving sacrificially of their time and of their money so they could go down to the Dominican Republic and help these people that could really use help. And eventually I figured out with the Dominicans that I told them that these North Americans were selling things from their house to raise money for their church. Now, in American terms, that sounds weird because we do a garage sale because we have so much stuff, we just got to get it out of the house and maybe we'll get a few bucks for it. But if it doesn't sell at the garage sale, we're going to give it to Goodwill. But the way Haitians and Dominicans manage their money, because pesos were so unstable, once you got any money, you bought something right away and you kept that TV or that radio. And if things got bad, you sold that TV or radio to get the money to help out with the bad thing. And so when I translated it to that North Americans were selling items out of their house in order to raise money for your church, they're like, oh, well, we just thought that in North America, money is just everywhere and it flows. And it kind of is. So there's your point about local and what should we call it? Disconnected in terms of this agency question, the phenomenology of agency, which is I think what Nathan was talking about. That's huge for us.
Can I put in one caveat for the chat?
Sure.
There are people, like the principle of subsidiarity, there are things which are proper to the level of the national or at a higher level than the local. But my sense is that for the vast majority of people, that is not where they live. And so I don't think that we should, there is, like, I'm not saying discard national politics altogether. I mean, as a Christian living in society, or as a human living in society, you're probably more likely than it's a probabilistic statement. More likely than you're not, you are positioned in a place where you are better suited at the local level. Does that nuance come through, Paul?
When I work with homeless people, I see a ton of government interaction. And whereas some of it is beneficial because some of their problems are governmental in nature, I often see real binding that because you're working on a level of policy, and all of these policies are well meant and sometimes effective. But I also see this disconnect between the donor and the person, which is why when people see all the homeless people around my church, they say, what should I do about the homeless? Stop and talk to them.
Yeah.
Develop a relationship. You can't handle all these homeless people. Develop a relationship with one person and work on that relationship. And you both will be blessed through it, even though the truth is you're not going to save their life, probably.
Just to add to that too, and I think a ministry can be a mediator between the donor and the person in a way that the government can't, in the way that the Bible tells us to share all good things with our teacher. We can share back the good things that are happening to a donor in ways that the government just, it's going to be a pie chart or whatever about what they're doing. That's a really cool thing about Christian ministry, is that reciprocal nature of it. Yeah.
Nathan, go ahead. You're muted.
Well, the last thing you said reminded me of just yesterday. I had a class, like public libraries. So I'm a state university library, so I'm also public. And a lot of what we do is shelter the homeless, honestly. And it's so much what you said, Paul. Like, if I have a class of paying students, I'll also let all the homeless members in the building sit in on that have interest, right? But it's, librarians are kind of like a ministry between the government and the populace, where, I hadn't thought of that before, but when you said it, I just realized that, like, yesterday, 8 hours of the day was both dealing with listening to people that said, I left my bag over there, I got to get this, can you watch my water, can you, right? Can I use the bathroom, can I stay overnight? And students that are paying too much, and faculty that know that I wish I could give them all the information they need, but we're stuck in these corporate agreements about who can access what. It's like a little nexus viewpoint, probably like a church, I guess.
Okay. Go ahead, Colin.
I can't help but feel a lot of times when people talk about topics like this and all that, they're looking for an ideal solution, and there really isn't one. And I think of that in the sense that, like, mainstreaming things, it's kind of like Bilbo talking about being spread thin, like too little butter on too much bread. And that's the reason why anybody who's a fan of something, you quickly learn to hate when your thing becomes mainstream. It's like as soon as like the UFC and MMA really got getting big past 2010, that's when I checked out of it. And I've noticed it's something, it's not my thing, but I know a lot of people who are interested in it. Like the wargaming thing, Warhammer 40,000, you probably never heard of it. That's a lot of fascinating stuff if you want to dig into it, Paul. But it's getting in that period where it's going to get mainstream, and the community is aware enough of it that they're really upset. They want it to be their small little niche thing that can be its thing and not get dragged out and become bland. But as you touched upon, Paul, localism isn't all like sunshines and rainbows. It concentrates the feuds. Well, I know that where I live, there's only one highway that connects to the rest of the island. There's another logging road that's like a 6-hour detour that's really rough, and like people die every so often driving it. And we had a forest fire a couple years ago that burned down, cut off the highway for like 2 months. And the big family in our town are the Colsons, and they have their fingers in a lot of pies, but they have a fleet of planes and helicopters that do forest fighting. And everybody in town was like asking during this forest fire, like, why are the Colson planes not doing anything? And it's because our province hates the Colson's guts, and they refused to sign them up to a contract to fight a forest fire like 20 kilometers away from where their airfield is. They were sending planes off to Australia and California. So yeah, everything's lovely when you think about it local, but then it gets like really nasty when it doesn't. Yeah. And I think that's the reason why we want to mainstream, to spread out the thing. Like Trump and Elon Musk, they're not friends anymore. They had a falling out, but now it's like affecting your entire country. It's like, should it be that way? And I was thinking too, with how monarchy tries to kind of make it a balance with the local and the mainstream. And depending on how things go, that can be like really good, or it can be like really anachronistic. And I thought about like Alexander I after the Napoleonic Wars. He really wanted to crack down on revolutions and other stuff. And he basically said to Europe, and like, the Russian army is at your service. Like, he looked to the King of Spain and said, like, no, your American colonies are in revolt. You have the Russian army. You just have to ship it over, and we'll fight and crush all of these independence movements. And that went nowhere, because the British looked and went, oh, you have to do that through the Royal Navy, and we will shut off Spain's access to the Americas. And Spain was like, stop trying to be our friend, Alexander. Like, we have a chance here. Like, we don't want the Royal Navy getting involved. So, like, and all of his other actions, he wanted to like create like basically a new Christendom and get Christianity involved. And like, even the Pope was looking at him like he was an anachronism. They're like, we're not going to agree with you. Like, this is really out of touch. And in some ways you can kind of understand why they would think that way. But at the same time, it's like the guy was really trying to tackle with matters, and everybody just wasn't in sync with him.
You know, it's interesting because people very quickly think it's either or. But one of the things I loved about our conversation, Colin, and your story, your story shows how, I mean, on one hand, you've benefited from elements of the Canadian social safety net is far more generous than the American social safety net. You've benefited from those Canadian social safety nets. You've also seen the downsides of those systems. You've benefited when your extended family took you and your mom because your dad, didn't pay the mortgage. Yeah. Your extended family reached in, but it's not an either or. And like you said, you're going to have to send me the reference to that book, because it's exactly these kinds of issues that I'm so fascinated by, because the French basically, when Pius IX fled Rome to Gaeta, the French were like, we'll take over Rome again, we'll put you in, but you have to have a constitution. Pius said, no constitution. I'm not doing a constitution. And he basically blustered the French into it. But you're right. It's all these levels. And we've been, for the last couple of 100 years, we've been negotiating all of these things. And the difference between a constitution and a monarch is that the reason the monarchs didn't want a constitution is they said, we don't want human rights. And it was, to those who are like looking at Doug Wilson, one of the little tiny things that he said that I didn't pick up in the video was, he said, there's no such thing as rights of men. And it's like, there's that monarchism right there with Doug Wilson, for whom you shouldn't find any monarchism in Doug Wilson. But there it is. Go ahead, Colin.
There's more than that, too, because it's layering something else there. With one of my courses for a lecture, we had a guest speaker who's this native lady from one of the local First Nations. And I found it interesting because she was trying to relate about how them reclaiming their culture, their children, they should be what they are, what we've always been. But then when she'd talk about that, then she'd say, and they have human rights. And eventually at the end, one of the other students spoke up saying, like, well, if people should just be what they are, why do they need human rights? And she was like, I don't know. But then it's like, you could see where as much as she's wanting to reclaim her people's heritage, she also has Western thinking in her mind where it's like, human rights are the good thing, so we have to have those. And whether she likes it or not, she's very much a hybrid of those two things. And I would say, even though like there's a trend within a lot of movements within the Native community to like, even the radicals that like hope one day to like expel all the hundreds of millions of non-natives from the Americas, which like, it's not going to happen. Like, it's never going to be a thing where they're going to be able to separate those things anymore.
Yeah.
But everybody's in that same boat together in their own ways.
That's right. We all are.
Can't unring that bell.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nathan.
Well, I feel like we take as baseline things that we have the capacity to build, right? It would be like if a wasp starts from their wasp nest rather than from being a wasp. So that almost all the time in these conversations, we're already starting with the thing that we had the capacity to make as the kind of being we are. But we don't think under that of what kind of being are we? I don't know. Like, all of our terminal. I was just thinking about people that come in that speak different sounds, which we call different languages, but they're humans making different sounds. But you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When we talking between the Orthodox or the whoever's language about God or whoever's language about land or local or national, those are all already like tertiary or even beyond levels of talking as humans or making sound or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So Nathan, we're sort of fully integrated culturally. Like, the language I speak influences my grammatical patterns, which triggers how I think about things. Like, when I'm thinking in German, which I don't do much anymore, and I'm thinking in English, let's say this: when I spoke German regularly, my English grammar changed as a result of heavily speaking German. And there's a reason the German philosophers are a certain way. And so we have this, like, there's this, where's German in the cultural layer, or where's language in that cultural layer? Is it mere utterance? Is this deeper thing? So it's there's this deep integration. And so, like, what broke is really what changed, I guess will be more neutral, is the shape of our social networks. resulting from technology. And I would say, like, we have this social network that does the same thing as language. It goes from way up here to way down here, and like at a hormonal level, it's there. But then something shifted, and we're in relationship with a much broader social group, and then I feel like that's where what we're trying to. I mean, that's why pornography and national politics are the same. It's the same issue of now I have access to, instead of where my brain was designed to be here. Not my brain, but my vertical stack. That was really philosophical, but I'll ping it back to you, Nathan.
Well, are you saying that you need to organize that, or is it just proliferation of a species? Like, I totally got you with how if you learn more languages, your own languaging
changes.
I would say proliferates, right? Like the capacity of thinking about how to sound to another, or it's sort of like psychology. If you learn these layers of theories of, or religion of practice or whatever, then you're just proliferating capacities as a thing, or a happenstance of being. But I don't know. It's the other piece of like trying to structure that stuff into a contained space that you feel safe. I think that's what, like when we try to make distinctions between localism and nationalism, like those are, if I could make a choice that I should be more local, or I should be more national, or I should be evangelical, or I should be liturgical, those are the places where I want them to make proliferations, and they happen to naturally. That's why perhaps is always as it occurs, is my general feeling about truth. But I'm curious what comes up in the others about, boy, would I like it better if I had a equation rather than a opening.
Brian, I want to get you in this because you haven't spoken much, but I see this, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I see this as part of the puzzle in terms of, I mean, when Brad came to me at Midwestuary and said, I want to do a project with you, with my brother, because we're identical twins and we've lived parallel lives, and then sort of Trump pulled us apart. And I see so much of this Trump moment in terms of, I see families, I see people splitting up because of something as far away as the president of the United States.
Yeah, and then thankfully there is this mechanism I think most of us have, at least with our families, to where the split ups don't happen. We just stop talking about politics and religion. I very much recognize what you're saying as a part of this. Brad's and my differences, relationality, we're talking twins from the womb, you know, you don't get any more grassroots and local than that, right?
Nope.
But then you've got Trump, the president of the United States, leader of the free world.
For 8 years.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I think I'll say the positive side of it is we're still talking.
Yeah.
And I think the negative side of it is we're at a sort of an impasse, but still talking. And that's actually why I'm here. That's why he did the Randos. That's why I'm doing the Randos. And I think we may think about how to format a third one where both of us are actually talking like we usually do. I think he is good about this, and I am game for it. integrating into our ideas and ideology differences, what our differences are from family of origin experience, because that's where it starts to diverge, right? Twins being born. I mean, I was born first. He was born 23 minutes later. And
Did he have
even
your
in the
heel?
womb,
Yeah, I was holding on to his heel.
that is not documented, but I wouldn't doubt it. I don't think I have a birthright, but I'm watching out for it. He's coming for me, I'm sure. I just think, I mean, you've set up the question well, and sort of framed it with me. I mean, as we're sitting here talking about it, I think about Christian nationalism, you know, papal authority over a free world, if that's, you know, sort of the mashup we would describe it as. Religion and politics sort of mashed together, and people at grassroots level fighting about it. I don't know how to connect this thought, but I'll just say I think the most important thing is from either the lower or the upper, the local or the national. The most important thing is imitation. That's the strongest influence. How we act, how we behave, how we treat each other, how we our language, how we speak. This is the most salient and important thing. I mean, the ideology is going to work out or it won't. But if we don't treat each other well, because imitation is both. Bad behavior is imitated and good behavior is imitated at both the upper level and the lower level, the local and the national. So I think it's one of the things that's on my mind as a pathway or solution. Certainly, dialogue is one thing. I think that's the theme of Southestuary. Uh, the practice, what we're doing here in Estuary, and just being there and showing up and hearing from each other our ideas and our lives and connecting in this way. Although, you know, uncovering differences, it's very important to do it. And so dialogue is key for me, but I just keep thinking about imitation as we're sort of setting up this expanse between, you know, how do you bridge the local and the national. I think that either way, it actually, I mean, Jonathan Peugeot talks about it in terms of fractals, you know, the structure or hierarchy or the reality, the symbols, and redemption itself, the logos fractals down. But it's also from the bottom up where there's a response to it. And I think that is imitation. So I don't know. I'll sum it up by saying that imitation. I don't know
It's
what it means
interesting
to
that
y'all.
it's interesting you have love of God and love of neighbor. And
Yeah.
you can draw a parallel here with this. You know, it also strikes me that I look at a number of people who are, and I'm not talking about anybody in the corner, I'm talking about people completely outside the corner, who are so in text, in messaging, they are so vocal and strident about the stuff up here. And in actuality, I see them practice nothing down here.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because our estuary, our Sunday morning estuary, the pitch that won is a common pitch right now where people are feeling troubled and disconnected because all of this national chatter, because everything's sort of coming apart. And I remember one person, he's not a guy who comes to the church at all, but he said, you know, what really helps me is when I go and basically I go and help out at Loaves and Fishes, which is sort of the homeless shelter. I go and do this thing, and then suddenly I settle down. And I was listening to on Mark Barker's channel. Mark from Tbilisi and his wife. If you haven't listened to the episode on Mark D. Parker's channel with Mark and his wife from Georgia, she has this near-death experience, or whatever you want to call it, and she sees this tree, and again, as often happens with, okay, we're sending you back because you haven't completed your task, and she's like, well, what's my task? And then she discovers this is during the collapse of the Soviet Union and this mess. You have all of these orphans. She gets involved in helping an orphanage down the road, and they weren't really orphans. Their parents were homeless. But it's, again, so often when I see people just set their hair on fire over national politics, I want to say, okay, I don't care what you believe nationally. Well, all I would ask you to do is get deeply involved with someone on the ground. It can be homeless, it can be substance abuse, because what I so often find, and Jason can speak to this, I find so much wisdom at that local level, and people at that local level, they've got their opinions about politics just like everyone else. But to me, very often, if you don't have the credibility down here below, I'm a lot less inclined to hear your ideas about, how you think the big picture should be run.
Yeah. Paul,
go ahead, Paul.
Can I reemphasize that if there's cancer in the body, it's not, your brain function doesn't matter that much. You're gonna die. You have liver cancer, it doesn't matter that your head's all right. So why the emphasis on local is because it seems like that's what's dying. That's where the source of the cultural cancer is. It's the breakdown of that level. And so, do national politics matter? Yeah, but it doesn't matter if our communities are cracking and falling apart. Like, Jason, have you been to Cass in downtown Phoenix?
One of the most unpleasant experiences of my life is picking up or dropping off people there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's where they put all the homeless people in Phoenix.
Oh. It's like a block. There's an agency there, but it's kind of this block of just the concentration of every human misery you can imagine, with a bunch of fentanyl and meth mixed in.
When I used to volunteer at the Andre House down there every Wednesday. This was a long time ago when I had fewer kids. But it's if you go
just
to a place
through it is like it does things to you.
It's absurd where we are culturally if you go to a place like that. And there's nothing that the federal government is going to do to clean up Cass. It has to be derived from the relational commitment of some of the most holy people I know are down there trying to work and trying to make it happen. And I am not in their ranks, but I think that this is no, it's not that we think that national doesn't matter. It's your point, Paul. There's so much sickness at that lower layer of the fractal. All right, I'll pass it to someone else.
If I could go back to what Colin was saying about these folks that had the ability to put out the forest fire, but out of personal bitterness and whatever, we're just not even going to use them. And I think the great advance of the nation state was that it got rid of some of that tribalism, and it brought in professionalism, and we have to do things the correct way, right? But what the internet has done is it's now split sibling twin from twin, down two separate rabbit holes. And it didn't just bring in tribalism, but it breaks down families into these technological tribes. I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing the difference between Brian and his twin probably came with different internet rabbit holes, being the imitating that they're picking up on. And I'm guessing that was part of that wedge and how we saw Trump so differently. So it has this unique ability to break down the nation state and the family and everything and create this weird technological tribe.
Eric Hamilton.
Hi, yeah. I just jumped in like, I don't know, 40 minutes into the whole stream, and then I watched it back like at 3 times speed just so that I could catch up with you guys and make sure that I actually knew what was happening. But something that really, as I've been ruminating on, silently during the discussion, is the idea of, and I don't know who said it, but the idea of essentially big government, or the idea of being ultimately concerned with national politics, as you can say, as pornographic in nature. I think that that's actually, I can't fathom how true that is, or how true that feels to me, because I even thought about like the fact that if we're defining pornography in that sentence as like the idea of a simulation of something that is genuine and important, but you're acting like you're participating in it, but you're not truly participating in any fruitful function. I think we live in an age, and this is a redundant statement, but trying to extrapolate broader, we live in a pornographic age, because I thought about the Ukrainian girl who was stabbed on that bus. And I thought about the fact that she was not assisted or helped at all. And I just think how many people on that, like I asked the question, like how many people on that bus watched the Avengers in theaters? Like they were able to be heroes vicariously through the screen. But when the opportunity arose for them to be a hero, and I'm not saying they could have saved her life, I guess I'm just saying the idea is that like a moral moment where there's a villain right in front of you, no one was Captain America in that moment. And I just think like the idea that we live in an age where it's just like, I don't know how we got structured or formed in such a way that it's like all responsibility actually is like at levels that like I can't do anything, right? Like the idea is like there's nothing on the ground level besides when it's time for me to get outraged. When it's time for me to get outraged, that's the time in which I like have all the moral agency in the world to actually take action, right? And anyway, I thought that was really profound.
Action happens in typing or voicing.
Exactly.
Those are the actions.
Well, and yeah, and then what you brought up the point, right? You brought up the point, Paul, about true religion is caring for widows and orphans, and within James's day, he's writing that, not saying therefore donate to your local nonprofit. You know what I mean? Therefore, sit in your cushy, living room, typing on your iPad, saying submit that $20 to your local nonprofit. Right? It means getting your hands very dirty, and being the Avenger, being the Captain America in that moment that you can be when those opportunities arise. And so yeah, I just thought that was really profound. How the you could say the epidemic of pornography, what is at the heart or root of that is a sort of simulated act of I act like I'm participating in reality when I genuinely, and just sort of passing that responsibility off to some people. And it's funny because I'm old enough to remember when the conservative movement, like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, what I think probably pre-COVID, was all about personal responsibility. I don't really hear anybody talking about that as much anymore, at least on these like big name, big tent conservative movement anymore. They don't talk about that as much. So anyway, that's my piece.
And it's also the case that if you actually build a relationship with a person who's struggling in just about any way, the last thing you will feel like is Captain America. And the one thing you will probably recognize is, gosh, how helpless am I And you will probably have a vision. Many people who start at the local level do become activists at another level because from the bottom they can see structural problems. And so again, it's not an either or.
Yeah.
But if you're not informed all the way through the stack, and none of us really can be fully, because let's say you become specialized in one thing that I became very specialized in was the life of one Mormon homeless man who was bipolar. I became very specialized in his life. And my own ministry started in the Dominican Republic. And one of the things that I learned so thoroughly there was I was so helpless. And there was this discrepancy of wealth where I thought, $1,000 can make a huge difference in the life of a person who lives on 50 cents a day. And you know what you learn? It can and it can't. And you would think, just multiply that out, because you think, wow, $100,000 would make a big difference in a life that's there. I wish Jason were here, because if I would give a junkie on the street $10,000, I have a fair idea what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know I would have helped. But again, go ahead. And Colin, I love Colin's story, because when you listen to someone for 2 hours sort of map out so many of the complexities in his father, his mother, family of origin, situation, you see the combinatorial explosiveness there. And then suddenly we're back in Nathan's pitch, where is the line between agency and providence? So go ahead, Alex.
So